Hey, just had my coffee after live streaming the mass. Oop, I'm gonna put my seatbelt underneath my thingy-bobber here. And we're here at the Alexander Austin, one of his murals dedicated to Martin Luther King. I thought it would be fitting on this weekend with all that's going on and everything to show it some love. Another photographer friend of mine did that with his drone. I thought I would do it with my low-flying drone. And then thought I would meander on my way home, but in so doing, do a little live stream. Turn my navigation on. And we are here at Linwood and Troost. I'm going to go up the 31st and Troost and head east, which 31st and Troost eventually becomes the Victory Highway, I-40, or not I-40, the US 40. Victory Highway in this part of the country has been replaced by I-70. That beeping you hear is a bomb about to go. No, it's my DJI Pocket 2 turning itself off, saying, you want to save the battery, even though it's plugged into real power, shore power. Turning right here on 31st at Operation Breakthrough, and up here on the right is Walt Disney's original Laugh-O-Gram studio, which there have been talks over the years of actually restoring it. I mean, it's in really sorry shape. Supposedly that studio is where Walt Disney invented the character of Mortimer Mouse, or as he became Mickey Mouse. This gas station here on the corner, and on the other corner is kind of interesting too. It's like a car lot, but it's like this really old school car lot. Oh, look at that VW bus. This is heading east on 31st Street. This at one time was a major highway that you would use to come into town, and when highways were named instead of numbered, this was known as the Victory Highway. So named after in honor of World War I veterans who fought in the war and attained victory and peace for the United States. The symbol of the Victory Highway, I believe, is a doughboy in full battle combat gear. There's somebody standing in the middle of the road up here, and we want to avoid that. This road is driving east towards. Maybe we'll skip on up into downtown Independence, hometown of Harry S. Truman. Yeah, I believe the Chiefs are playing at Arrowhead, and because we heard a low-flying airplane come over. It was a jet. And while I was having coffee, and people, there's a box in the road. Fine. So avoid that too. And the owner of the coffee house, Jim, and some other people came in and said, we just saw the B-2. And I was like, yeah, did you, when you saw it, were you humming the Batman theme? It kind of looks like a bat plane. So Batman might fly. But I guess they're doing a flyover, and then we all were speculating on how much of American tax dollars is that costing, because the B-2 So hopefully they incorporate a training aspect to the mission, and because they do have to train to fly the thing. And then I was remembering back in my days when I was in the Air Force, and they talked about how they have to simulate every flight before they fly it and everything. So the B-2 is especially expensive plane to fly. B-2, if you don't know, is a stealth bomber. It's a flying wing designed by Northrop from, there's a lot of ties to the Nazi regime in Germany that, a company called Horten experimented with flying wing designs, and then of course the Nazis came over to America, the scientists and designers, and helped us design and build military equipment. I'm not sure how much of that was incorporated in Northrop experimenting with flying wings before that, but so we're like here at the 31st and Jackson. Here on Kansas City's east side on old US 40. Kind of a Route 66 that never had the real growth of Route 66, like 40 Highway. I'm trying to think, how far out does 40 Highway go across the United States? It doesn't go all the way, I don't think. It kind of merges. I don't know. I have to look that up. I think maybe it merges with out west with the Lincoln Highway, but I'm not sure of that. I don't know. Before I speak too much and say things inaccurate, I just not speak at all, I guess, about that. But 40 Highway does go right through Kansas City. And right here, it's 31st Street. It was replaced by I-70 starting in the 1950s through the 1960s. When, another thing that we borrowed from the Germans, when General Eisenhower, later President Eisenhower, with the Army, he was across the United States in a convoy, and it took him, I think they said it took him 90 days to do that, and it was sort of spurred along the idea that we need to work on our roads and highways, because if we needed to defend our country from a foreign invasion, then we needed good roads to be able to get across the country on. And Europe had always had a lot of decent roads, because southern parts of Europe and western parts had the Roman Empire, and they built very straight, beautiful roads. The basis of a European highway system. And so, a lot of armies were able to move back and forth over Europe very quickly because they had an extensive network of roads. And eventually that was replaced by railroads, as railroads were coming into being. And then first, some of the Prussian War against the French was probably one of the first railroad wars in the United States. The American Civil War. South, in that we had a good unified rail network in the Union, but the South had a rail network, but they had different gauges first big battle of the Civil War. The Battle of Bull Run was actually fought using railroads very extensively, and let people know that there was a new era in warfare, because a lot of people were using Napoleonic tactics and everything, and here they started shuttle. It was like, whoa. Very fast. I'm a big train buff too, but this highway, Eisenhower traveled across country. He recommended that we build up a road system. At the time, there were auto trails. That was actually started by people who rode bicycles. They wanted a good way of getting around outside of the cities on their bicycles. Bicycles weren't very easy to ride in dirt and horse tracks and things like that. That was the only way of getting around the United States. So they were pushing, it was called the Good Roads movement, started in like 1875. And that eventually manifested into these associations where some wealthy people would try and help fund and promote good roads in the United States. And, Eisenhower went across the United States in the convoy and found that the roads in the United States were crappy as opposed to the European good roads. So if we ever had to defend our country, so the first federal funding for highways was brought about because we wanted to be able to get our military around quickly via automobile or whatever. And then in the 1920s, we created one of the first highway acts, and that turned the auto trails, which were named roads, like this one was called the Victory Highway, into numbered highways. So this became US 40. And, a US route was a route that was funded by the federal government. And then Eisenhower, again, during World War II, when the Americans were marching into Germany, they were able to rapidly go up and down the German autobahns, which were, of course, a creation of the Nazis and Adolf Hitler and such. And the autobahns were these super straight, super highways that you could go any speed at. Still to this day, there's no speed limits on some German autobahns. And Eisenhower, again, was so impressed by that when he came back to the United States, he pushed forward the Interstate Highway Bill, which came into law in, 1957? And after that, the interstate highways replaced the U.S. highways as the major federally funded thoroughfares. And that's how we got the replacement for US 40, which is I-70 in this area, starting in the late 50s into the 1960s. Now, many people would argue, as I would too, the highways are great, they're efficient, and then they're apt to help out the big guy, the little business person. Often, as is always the case with big projects like that. And also, another nickname for these bridge cutoff sign is like hanging by a thread. That's scary looking. I don't know if we can see that sign right there. But another nickname for the interstate highways are rich man's roads through poor man's neighborhoods. And you can see that all across the country, where they would find the cheapest land they could find to build a highway through and destroy neighborhoods, often neighborhoods for people of color and immigrants and things like that. And so a lot of old neighborhoods. There's one neighborhood in that I'm thinking of over in Kansas City, Kansas. It was a beautiful old neighborhood, and what was there before they ripped it apart with the highway was Strawberry Hill. And there's pictures of it in that museum that's there, the Strawberry Hill Museum, of what the neighborhood looked like before they they essentially ripped the whole neighborhood in half. Now that's a neighborhood of what, Serbian, Croatian immigrants. So, there are a lot of places where they built these roads. It's not very fair. They're not going to build, like, I think that I-70 is a bit gerrymandered. By that I mean it kind of snakes around into places that aren't really a natural course for it to take. I think it would have gone right through the plaza, which is a very higher end shopping district in Kansas City. But instead they kind of gerrymandered it, wiggled it around through the east side, through a lot of poor black neighborhoods, into downtown. And I just feel like to illustrate my point, when I was learning driver's education in high school, and my high school is up here at Fort Osage High School on the east side of Independence, we drove around. We had to drive with the driving instructors on the highway, so we took I-70 into downtown and came back. And the instructor told us, be careful on these two curves here, the Jackson curve and the Benton curve. They're very sharp curves. A lot of people have accidents on them. And I'm like, yeah, they are curves built there to gerrymander the highway into downtown through poor neighborhoods. And they're so badly designed that forever we know there are lights indicating, hey, you're going too fast for this curve. And yeah, there are a lot of accidents. The highway should have been made straighter, even if it is trying to direct its way to downtown. There was a straighter way of doing that, but houses and neighborhoods in the way that the rich people could hire lawyers and do protests and everything, and by God, we listened to them. So let's go through the poor neighborhoods over here. And one of the neighborhoods that kind of rip in half, and it's a real shame because we now identify that as like the heart of what Kansas City is, one of the big landmarks. But they pretty much ripped the heart out of what was at the heart of the African American district in Kansas City. So yeah, you can't discuss a whole lot of issues in this country without first trying to understand a little bit of history and maybe looking at it with different eyes and different point of view. And it's not very, very long or hard that your conversation goes right back into politics. Things. But now I'm in Independence. Actually, I'm on the border. I think technically I'm still in Kansas City. It says Vice President Biden. Who the hell are you? That would be very funny if it really was Vice President Biden, but I'll play along. Who the hell am I? I don't know. Who the hell are you? I'm just a guy who likes to drive around and hear himself speak. I'm driving in Independence on the Victory Highway. Are you familiar with that? Actually, soon to be president. Well, amen to that. Thank you, sir, for getting yourself elected, because the last guy was a bit sketchy. Now I am turning off of the Victory Highway US 40 onto Noland Road. Noland Road, when I was in high school, was one of the biggest cruising streets in the Kansas City metro area. People used to drive hot-rodded cars up and down, kind of like American Graffiti, up and down Noland Road, and sometimes they would go as fast as they could. I remember when I was in high school, there was a high school up here named Truman High School, named after President Truman, because this is President Truman's hometown. And some kids wiped themselves out in a wreck. It was a fatal accident. So they had this program back then, I think sometimes they still do this, where they took the wreck of this car and put it right in front of the school, because a lot of kids were very emotionally upset by it, just to kind of create, I guess they hoped, some good trauma, which means think about what you're doing. You're not immortal. Don't drive like an idiot teenager. And people were really upset about that. They said, how dare you? These kids are traumatized. That car reminds them. There's even blood on the car. And I'm like, yeah, well, a lot of people were also saying, hey, that's a good thing. Get these kids to think about what they're doing. But this road here is lost a lot of its allure since those days, and now it's a shadow of itself. At one time, this was like one of the biggest cruising streets in the whole metro area. I mean, people traveled from everywhere in the metro just to drive up and down Noland Road. And we used to joke, hey, what do you want to do? You know, when I was in high school, what do you want to do? Let's go cruise Noland. Which I think I did maybe a couple of times. I had a friend who had a candy apple red Chevy, 1972 Chevy Chevelle with Krager wheels. His dad actually built it for him, and it was fun, but those were the days. And now this road is just kind of like, like a lot of things out here in Independence, seen better days. Actually, we're gonna meander the border of my high school district. That was one of the things we were talking about too at the coffee shop. The conversation was like how people can get so. Oh, here's Truman High School right here. The Patriots, named after Harry S. Truman. This is his hometown, Independence, Missouri. But yeah, we were talking about how people would get so much into their little rivalries that you know, like when a football game was happening, there'd be invariably be a fight in the stands, and they're like, who does that? Who thinks that much of their high school? I mean, the second you leave high school, that becomes about the most unimportant thing, unless, you know, of course, high school was your glory days, and then you meet people like that who just like still keep that rivalry going. But you know, you're not going to hear too often, oh, the Truman Patriots versus the Fort Osage Indians, what a big rivalry that is. And no, that's like high school. That's not like or what was it? I think the big rivalry up here was the William Chrisman Bears versus the Fort Osage Indians, and it wasn't that big a rivalry, let me tell you. But we had some people who one night decided to go visit the William Chrisman High School, and of course, you know, they are the home of the Bears, and they had a big stuffed bear over the door of their high school, and so they decided to vandalize it to let them know that, you know, the high school rivalry. And, you know, instantly knew who it was because they're They shot an arrow through the bear. Okay, Fort Osage Indians, and they farmed the football field, and then they teepeed the football field. Again, Fort Osage Indians, teepee, toilet papered, but also teepeed. You try and do it in like a teepee pattern so that. And so, all it did was they talk about woke a sleeping giant and filled him with rage. Well, we woke the William Chrisman Bear giant and filled them with rage because they beat us badly. But when I was in high school, our football team sucked, and everybody knew it. Yeah, once you get up to this point here on Nolan Road, all the fun was over. You didn't cruise much beyond here. It was just from here south, really, with all the car lots and everything. And back in the 80s, I'm dating myself, but back in the 80s, now it's like it's gotten really, really run down. Not much. And I think the politics of independence has a lot to do with it. It's a very, very conservative town, and it's generally harder to get things approved by the city council. Like, Independence doesn't like bars. It doesn't like any kind of entertainment. They try to keep a lot of transportation options out of the city. So the bus service up here is pretty bad. Of course, they, again, back to the poor man or rich man's roads through poor man's neighborhoods. Definitely, you couldn't build any highways or anything around Independence. We can't mess up this town that way, which, I mean, in many ways I agree with that, but also, you have to go, okay, but we do need transportation. We need to get people in and out of a city. Independence, I always felt like it was bigger than it was. Like, this was the major city, and we don't want people from Kansas City coming here, and we don't want our people to move away to Kansas City. And I'm like, yeah, but one of the things that really hurts this town a lot is there aren't that many jobs here. So people are all going elsewhere for jobs. They may live up here, but because, you have to have a car and everything, there aren't that many transportation options. I was faced with that when I wanted to strike out on my own, and I kind of was thinking I would move in with my friend who lived here in Independence. And I'm like, okay, well, you have to buy a car. And so I couldn't afford a new car. I didn't have any credit or anything. And the only things I could afford was junk. And that was going to put me in a lot of... The bus service, the apartment that he lived at, I had to walk at least a mile every day just to get to the bus. So yeah, to try and be independent in Independence, you really didn't have very many options. And so there's no way for people to build or generate wealth in this town. So they move away to somewhere where they can have better options. A common house, studio, coffee, co-working, a creative space. Oh, that's interesting. We're kind of winding the clock. Let's see, we going clockwise? Yeah, so we're winding the clock in Independence Square. Love the square. This courthouse right here, over to the right, which is not easy to see from the angle I'm at, is where Harry Truman worked as a judge. But he was not a lawyer. He was not a judge. As that's the funny thing about Harry Truman. he was very well read. He was a very smart guy. Actually, over here on the corner to the north here is a little drugstore that he worked at when he was younger. But he wasn't an attorney or anything like that. Now, most people who get into politics are attorneys, but he wasn't. And so he was sort of blue collar, working class, but he respected education very much. After he was president, his library is up to the north of here, and after he was president, he was known to walk around this area a lot. As a matter of fact, if you look up over here, I don't know if I can get it with this. You see the little silhouette on the blue banner over there? That's Harry Truman walking around with his cane. He used to walk around here all the time, even after he was president. He had Secret Service follow him around and everything to make sure he was safe. So that's sort of the symbol of independence. And the house where he lived, his house, actually it was, should we go there? It was his wife's house. It was in her family, Bess Wallace Truman. And I don't, he relationship with the Wallace family. But up here on the corner, south, is the Harry Truman house. The Truman house. The Wallace Truman house. Right there, that white house, right there. And they give tours and everything. All right, make sure I can make this turn without somebody getting mad at me. Some interesting Civil War stories about Harry Truman. Supposedly this is true. There's 3 of them. The first one was when Harry Truman joined the Army in World War I. The Army wears is their formal uniform, and up until World War I, they wore the blue uniform, the Union blue. And so one day, and his home that he grew up in was actually in Grandview, the Truman farm home. And one day he comes galloping up the long driveway to his mother's house on a horse wearing the blue uniform. Well, his mother was a Confederate. Her family, all of them fought for the Confederacy. And here in Missouri, there was all this situation with the wasn't major armies going up and down. So the Union, in response to the Confederate guerrillas, burned out all the Confederate sympathizers. So when Harry Truman comes galloping up the driveway in his blue uniform on a horse, it brought back horrible memories to his mother, and she told him to get off the horse, get out of that damn blue uniform, that Yankee uniform, and don't ever wear that on my property again. And that's the first story. The second story is related to interstates and U.S. highways. Here's Harry Truman's presidential library, Harry S. Truman, which has been closed because they're remodeling it. The second story that is when the Wallaces were pro-union. Now, as I said, he moved into the house that belonged to his wife's family, the Wallaces. As a matter of fact, he married very well, and they were a very well-to-do family in Independence. That's Harry Truman Library. And so he moved into with them when he married Bess Wallace. And so I went on the tour and I noticed what I thought were interstate shields carved into the woodwork of the Wallace house, like on the banister to the stairs and everything. So I asked the tour guide, what's with the shields? And he said, oh, well, if you don't know what the shields are, what they're based on is the Union shield, with the eagle and everything. So whenever there's a Union-funded project, they usually put a shield on it. That's why your highways and U.S. highways and interstate highways have the shield. And I was like, oh, okay, so why? He said, well, the Wallaces were pro-Union, and they really wanted to show their loyalty to the Union because the house was built, I believe, in 1866, 1 year after the Civil War ended. So they were showing their loyalty to the Union, and so they had it carved into the woodwork of the house. And then the third story is, again, about Harry Truman's mother being a pro-Union or a pro-Confederate sympathizer, and she hates the damn Yankees and everything else like that. Well, he brought her up to the White House, and I guess she was fussing with him and pestering him about something or other, and in annoyance he said, if you don't behave yourself, I'm going to make you sleep in the Lincoln really quickly, because Lincoln was the president in charge of the Union, the reason why the South succeeded when he got elected. Now, any tour guides out there can tell me if I'm wrong, if these highway, and I should know the name of this one. This is US 24, and actually, this, I do know the name of this part of the highway. This part of the highway runs all the way across the United States. It's called the National Old Trails Road, and it goes from New York to Los Angeles, and what else do I know about it? Harry Truman was an avid car driver. He loved to drive, and he loved to drive up his highway, which was this one, the National Old Trails Road. It was named after the Santa Fe Trail, which this is also the Santa Fe Trail. And he was the president of the National Old Trails Road Association from, I believe, I can't remember the year he started as president, but he was president until he passed away. And he loved driving up and down this road. Now, here's another story about Harry Truman. The way he was a very unknown, what was he, a senator? He was a senator. He was very unknown, politically a nobody in Washington. As a matter of fact, he was a very controversial senator because his patron was Boss Pendergast. And Pendergast was a controversial figure, a picture of corruption in Kansas City. And Truman was a judge in the eastern part of the county, in the courthouse, in the county seat, which was in Independence, which we just passed through. And Judge Boss Pendergast wanted somebody who was, quote unquote, honest, they said, on the east side of his little empire. So they picked Truman, and then Truman got himself elected as senator from the Missouri from the state of Missouri. And people deridingly called him the senator from Pendergast. And when Pendergast was eventually convicted for his gambling, of all things, and tax evasion, I believe it was, tax evasion on gambling debts, and he passed away, not long after. I can't remember if Truman was a senator or what. Truman went to his funeral. He was very loyal to him, and that was very controversial because a lot of people didn't want anything to do with him. He was a corrupt, convicted felon, yada, yada, yada. And but one thing that Truman is known for, talking about him liking to drive and everything, and the way he made his name and the way he got on President Roosevelt's radar and eventually became Roosevelt's vice president, because I believe Roosevelt's original vice president was impeached. I'm not sure of that. But Truman became Roosevelt's. Truman got himself in charge of the committee to make sure that defense contractors weren't overcharging the government. And Truman used to drive his car all over the place, all over the country, and make these surprise inspections at military installations where he would inspect them himself and make sure that the money, the taxpayers' money, was being spent properly and wisely. And right before World War II was, late 30s and early 40s, when all this was happening, was when it became very important for, at first it was like nobody cared, whatever. But then it became very important for the government money that was being spent on defense, because our budgets were starting to blow up as far as Defense Department. And Harry Truman found himself on a very important committee. And like I say, he loved to drive. It was an excuse for him to get in his car. Again, I don't know how I remember all this stuff, and I'm sure there's so much inaccuracy in what I'm saying. So if anybody feels like they want to correct me, I will not take offense. It's a great discussion to have. You can just leave it in the comments or whatever when you hear this and tell me I'm full of what, or I didn't know that. I wonder if anybody else could back me up on that. Now we're on 291, Missouri 291, not a U.S. highway, heading north. We just got off of the National Old Trails Road. National Old Trails Road is also known for the Pioneer Mother statues, which, again, Harry Truman, being he oversaw the construction of these monuments. And there's one in Lexington, Missouri, and it's essentially dedicated to the women who crossed the pioneer trails. That were dedicated to women who endured the hardships to help build this country. Crossing over. And after here, I'm going to take 210 west into North Kansas City. Here's the beauty that is the Missouri River. Ooh, there's an old bridge and a new bridge. When I lived here in high school, it was the only crossing across here. Then they built the newer crossing to the west of us here. Matter of fact, we just crossed over La Bonite Park. And La Bonite Park, speaking of driver's ed, is where my parents took both my sister and I to learn how to drive. We practiced in that park by the Missouri River. And at the 200th anniversary of Lewis and Clark exploring west, because they went up the Missouri River here, they crossed through this area. My uncle is an avid kayaker, and he went along and he kayaked all the way up the Missouri River and all the way down the Columbia River, and he kayaked down from the Ohio River, where they actually started their expedition into St. Louis, up the Mississippi into St. Louis, and then west on the Missouri. So when I was working at another TV station, I did a story on my uncle kayaking, and at the time he came through this area, I remember there was also another situation that was happening. It was a very disgusting situation where a meth head dad who was estranged from his wife murdered his own children to get back at her, and he hid their bodies west of La Bonite Park. But while we were there with my uncle, doing a video on that and talking to him and stuff, all these police showed up all of a sudden, and I called this TV station. I said, "Hey, there's a bunch of police out here. What's going on?" They said, "Really? There's a bunch of police there?" Well, they talked about, we're sending a reporter out there. Can you get some video? They're talking about that area being an area where he dumped the bodies of his children, but we haven't found them yet. Well, they didn't find them for a little while, and eventually they found them in Sugar Creek, which is west of there. Just a real sad story. And people should say no to drugs, but they should especially say no to methamphetamines. Those are horrific drugs. I've seen no end of people go from normal human beings into meth heads, which is what we call them, and just it completely destroys it. It literally eats people's brains. It rots your teeth and rots your brain out at the same time. Rots holes in your brain if you do enough of it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of meth in the United States, and there's a lot of meth here in this area, Independence. Matter of fact, I think a part of this insurgency is meth fueled, a big part of it. Meth and alcohol. And so if you're wondering why people may be a little bit crazy, I think that's why. That is so funny. Vice President Biden, who the hell are you? That would be something that Biden would say. I've seen some of the clips of him, and he's very he's kind of an in-your-face sort of guy. There was quite a few stories about how when he was Obama's vice president still, how he Obama, with his outspokenness and say things, he was often known for saying things that were kind of not very well thought out or practiced, off the cuff, straight shooter. Or in fact, what's his slogan? No malarkey, which is like, I don't know, kind of an old man slogan, I think. The No Malarkey Tour. And if he didn't agree with you, he's more diplomatic now that he's more of a politician. But there were times when he would call you out and chew you out in front of everybody. So maybe these are good signs of stronger leadership, but I doubt it. I think the presidency has been very badly weakened. I think he's going to have to deal with it. You know, when they say a team has had a bad season, like a football team, they say, well, it's a rebuilding year, meaning that the coach is having to find different players, the right players, train them in his style of play. And so I think this is going to be a rebuilding term for the presidency. A very bad losing team, the outgoing team, and now we need a team to take over, a new coach to come in and take over and rebuild it in the way that he sees it. And unfortunately, he's going to have a real tough go at it. And now he's got an insurgency in country to deal with of people who are crazy and violent, and I think unrightfully so. Matter of fact, around here, I actually think this is kind of cool. In case you haven't noticed, they're building a new truck stop out here, it looks like. New big something. But in case you have, and I don't know that much about it really, but around here, the Chiefs won the Super Bowl last year, and they're doing really well again this year. So instead of people being obsessed about what's going on in Washington and everything, they're getting on with their lives and they're cheering on the Chiefs. To be honest with you, I think that's a great thing. That is so cool. So people are like, hey, you better not mess with the fun we're having here by doing stupid stuff. Kansas City is a bit moderate when it comes to that. During the LA riots, a mayor of Kansas City, who was Emmanuel Cleaver, came out and talked with the crowds themselves, and really, I think he did a lot to keep what was going on in other parts of the country from really happening here. And there's been many instances where Kansas City has kind of taken the moderate route. Over what happened there, which sort of was the spark for the Black Lives Matter movement. Here in Kansas City, a lot of moderate forces were at work, leaders and stuff said, we don't want that here. What are you going to do? You're going to burn down the poor neighborhoods? That happens to be the neighborhoods of the oppressed people. What are you going to come out and... No, you're not going to do that. And so they talked to a lot of the people who were part of the Black Lives Matter movement. It seemed like there was two components of it. There was the students, the activists, which, is great, but oftentimes very misguided. And then there was the old 1960s radical people, like the hippies. Well, actually probably more like three components to it, because there were activists within communities as well. But the students and the hippies would kind of get together and be like, oh yeah, this is going to be all like, we're going to burn stuff down and riot and stick it to the man. And the people, the third part of that component, the community activists, were saying, no, don't do that here. Not in our neighborhoods, please. All you're going to do is burn poor people out of their own houses and destroy businesses and destroy jobs. We don't want that. So they really moderated it here, I think, in Kansas City. Very well. And unfortunately, that situation erupted again the summer of 2020, this summer. And the moderate forces were still there, still at work. But I think there was another element added to the whole mix. I don't know who they were. Some people say they were Antifa. Some people say they were actually right-wingers disguising themselves as Antifa, causing all the problems. But there were people who showed up, nobody knows where they came from, who only came out at night, and all they wanted to do was burn things down and destroy stuff. And that even happened here in Kansas City. They centered themselves on the Plaza, which is like a very upscale shopping district in Kansas City. And they broke glass and burned things, and a lot of people in Kansas City were not happy about that at all. It's like, you don't have to do that to get your point across. Matter of fact, you defeat, the violence and anger doesn't do anything. It just defeats what people are trying to do. And what's happened in Washington recently is illustrating that very clearly. Instead of like, people are going, oh yeah, there's a problem in this country we need to address. And now people are just like, we're really angry at the insurgents. You guys are nothing but a bunch of terrorists. We don't want to have anything to do with you. And really have whittled that down to where they are in the minority. And that's a shame, because there are some valid issues being brought up. Always there's valid issues when people bring that kind of thing up. And it should be addressed. But now it's like given an excuse to clamp down and be authoritarian and hateful. Yeah, well, we saw that coming. And like, no, you're making it happen. You didn't see that coming. You're making it happen. It's almost as if they're trying to make it. So they have an excuse to go out and be violent and destroy things. I mean, to me, that's more so than just the violence. That's what makes a radical element, is there's no reasoning. Like the QAnon stuff, I've looked at and read some of it. The funny thing is, there is always a kernel of truth to what people say. I believe there's even a little bit of a kernel of truth to what QAnon is saying, and it's been proven with the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, that there has been these rings of people selling people into sex slavery and stuff like that, and pedophilia and everything. And yeah, it has been kind of centered around the power centers, things like that. But I also believe, supposedly there's a government informant named Q, who's like this undercover person giving out information in sort of a code, and people's job is to interpret this code. It's like this whole, people have said it's like a whole video game element. It's almost like a game of Pokemon. Find the Pokemon. And so there's these people who just like spend their whole lives obsessing over. And I'm like, actually who Q is? I believe Q actually can be found in Moscow. And another thing about militia movements is that you do know that if you want to join up with any of these kind of groups, which, it's sort of your right to do, it's free speech and everything, but you do realize that a lot of these groups have been infiltrated by informants. I think half of the militia movements are actually informants, agent provocateurs trying to flush out people in the violent people. But in so doing, sometimes this stuff gets out of hand. And, again, there's a term that was actually used on Black Panther movement in the 1960s, which was COINTELPRO, and used against, speaking of Martin Luther King, used against the civil rights movement. and it was done by the FBI. You know, it's not fiction. You can read about it. It really happened. It's history. COINTELPRO stands for Counterintelligence Programs, and some of the tactics that were used were to infiltrate the movement, discredit the leaders, try and get the leadership to do incriminating things like, here's a Molotov cocktail, throw it, and then you're under arrest somehow, kind of thing. And I think that's what's been happening with the militia movements. But I don't know, there's some spooky things about it too. I think there's some actual sympathy from people who work in the government. I think that's been proven, and that's what's making something that I find scary, because part of what would make a civil war more than an insurgency and more like an actual civil institutionalization of two sides. Whereas, like the Confederacy had a governmental infrastructure. They had, I'm going to turn up here on Swift, go up the Jefferson Highway here, another auto trail route that I like. But they had, what made the Civil War so bloody is that the South, when it succeeded from the Union and formed its army, didn't have to work very hard to form an army, because I believe about half of all the West Point graduates, maybe more than half, went to the southern side. And so you got General Lee, I believe General Hood, all these General Longstreet. All these generals were very well-trained military officers who were trained by the U.S. military and U.S. government, who took up arms against that government in an insurrection. So that's what I mean, some of the warning signs are like institutionalization. Now, we have seen some federal people, like FBI people, have been sympathetic to the Trump side. We have seen, I think the scary thing is people apparently giving tours who were members of the House of Representatives, giving tours, essentially saying, now when you want to invade the Capitol building, go through this door here, and and here and here and here. And so when you have one side that is actually kind of, when you have two opposing sides and they are institutionalized, they have, in other words, it's not just a rabble with pitchforks and torches, it's well-armed, trained military men. Not to mention, some of the militias have been training themselves, and some of them have taken on ex-military, also, the one woman who was killed in the Capitol building was former Air Force. Actually, there was a colonel in the involved in that melee too, and both of them were Air Force. And I'm like, yeah, it seems like there's a lot of Air Force people who've taken up the wrong side. I'm not sure if that's like, if the Air Force really needs to address that and look at their ranks as maybe housing people who are not taking their constitutional oath seriously. I like this drive up here. This is coming into Gladstone. This is like leaving North Kansas City, back into Kansas City, and then coming up into Gladstone. This is the Jefferson Highway. So yeah, I worry about, I don't worry about much, but I'm looking at some of these signs, and one of the signs, there's a couple of signs that I'm thinking about now that when the American Civil War happened in the 1860s, there were some signs. First off was the violence that took place in Kansas, west of here. Another sign that let people know that a civil war was coming was one of the political parties. One of the political parties split in half at their convention. I believe the convention of 1860, and it was held, I think, in the South. Was it in the South? Maybe it was held in Philadelphia. I don't know. But it was the Democrats who split into the Southern Democrats and the Northern Democrats. It's like the Southern Democrats succeeded from the Northern Democrats. And that let people know that, hey, the people in the South are really going to leave the Union if things don't go their way. If the election goes against them, there won't be a Union anymore. And so when people saw that, that's when people really started gathering their muskets and making sure their powder was dry and melting lead into bullets and things like that. Back in those days, you could make your own bullets. I've known quite a few muzzleloaders, which is the name for the old rifles where you load them one shot at a time through the muzzle. But I meant to say hand loaders, like people who can make their own bullets. You can still do that. You can make your own bullets and ammunition. You can make usually the easiest ones are shotgun ammunition. You can make it the way you want it. There's recommendations on how to do it. It used to be a very popular hobby back in the 70s. A lot of hand loaders. They would sell the hand loading kit. And you could, but I think ammunition got cheaper and cheaper, so people are like, why bother with that? And I'm like, well, I think one reason to why bother with that is I really believe that if you're very interested in firearms, then I believe you should know what you're talking about. It's kind of like, now I don't think that everybody that drives a car should be like a race car driver or anything, but I do believe that if you're going to take up the hobby, the sport of firearms, I think you should train yourself, at least practice with it, get to know your tool of your trade. And and this nonsense about, well, there's no such thing as a assault rifles, you could take and put like different things on a regular rifle and make it into an assault rifle. And I'm like, well, okay, so let's change the name. And I prefer to say turning a tool such as a rifle or even a handgun into a weapon of mass casualty weapon. In other words, think rapidly, load rapidly, all the things you need to do for only one purpose, one reason, and that's create mass casualties among human beings. The things that you need to do for a quote-unquote assault rifle or mass casualty weapon are completely and almost in many ways opposite to what you would do if you're using that as a sportsman to hunt deer, for instance, or ducks or whatever. For one thing, I asked a long time ago, said, what is the best firearm for home defense? Like, I want to make sure that I can protect my house against burglars or whatever. And the answer from all of the well-respected people who I knew a lot about firearms, including one person who was a former Kansas City police officer, was, oh, forget about buying anything like an AR 16 or forget about all that. Don't buy yourself a handgun either, especially an automatic handgun. The best home defense weapon that you could have and keep it locked up safely in your house and ready to when you need it is a shotgun. And then I found out, there's also a way of turning a handgun into a shotgun. And I went to the when I was thinking about buying this stuff, I hadn't been thinking about it so much. Maybe I should. But I went to the arms dealer, and we were doing a story on that, and I asked him, hey, I heard there's a way to turn a handgun into... He said, well, yeah, here it is. And he showed me the gun. And he said, yeah, guns are. People have sense. When they hear a shotgun sound, which is unique, the click, click, they know some hurt is coming. And if they have any sense, they're getting out of the way. You don't, if you're like in a dark situation and somebody's in your house that shouldn't be and you're afraid for your life, you load that, and if that doesn't scare them and you shoot, you're going to hit them. You're going to hit something because it scatters. And chances are it's going to discourage whoever is going to discourage. The purpose of having that kind of force is deterrence. You don't want to hurt anybody. You don't want to kill anybody. And if somebody can't be deterred by that, then maybe the ultimate thing is to go ahead and use it and not be afraid to use it. Train yourself how to use it. Know how to use it. Now, I speak this way. I haven't followed through, so I'm not one to say, hey, I'm a great shining example of that. But now I'm thinking about, there's a a lot of Republicans, right-wing people talk about how they are pro Second Amendment and firearms, and yeah, we defend ourselves against the government. So one right-wing politician, kind of a well-known one, decided to have a Thank My Voters rally. And he decided to hold it at a target shooting range. And so we were sent to go get video of that for the news and do a story on it. And I tell you, I was standing behind these people, all these right-wing, pro-Second Amendment rights people, and I was afraid. I was afraid because these people didn't know about firearms. Here I am, a lefty, quote-unquote lefty liberal. I'm actually more of a moderate with left-wing leanings. And I knew more about it than they did from RA training, having a father who was big on firearms, and, the great American tradition. And a lot of these right-wing Republicans were actually scary to be around because they didn't know. They had never been introduced to it in their lives. I mean, they even made the target range people nervous. They were like, you guys don't have the slightest inkling about, can you point that thing down range, please? Stuff like that. Stuff we learn in the Scouts. So, yeah, there's a lot of BS out there. There's a lot of people talking out their butts who don't know what they're talking about. I freely admit I wouldn't know what I'm talking about either. But I know I've been introduced. I know a little. I've been rusty. When I was in the Air Force, I got marksman. Well, they didn't really have that in the Air Force so much, but they have it in Army. They have a little patch you can wear on your uniform. It says the U marksman, what was a score of, I think a perfect score is 40 in the target range, and I think you have to get at least a 36. And yeah, I fired the M16, the military version of the AR, with not much difference. And if you do what they tell you to do and you take the training, which most of the training is about safety, firearms safety, and then they show you how to fire the damn thing. If you do what they tell you, marksmanship is fairly simple. But I can't imagine ever wanting to point that thing at another human being. I don't think it's romantic. I don't think it's pretty. You know, for me to want to point something like that at another human being, they have to be trying to kill me or my family, essentially. Now, I understand the Patriot, the Minutemen defending, and, you know, a tyrannical government, if it's afraid of its citizens, yada, yada, yada. But there are many ways, many peaceful ways you can go about that before you have to reach that stage. We have never been at that stage in my lifetime. But what we have are a bunch of bored people who don't know what to do with themselves, listen to all these crazy crackpot conspiracy theories. I mean, most of these people, if you really want to make a difference, don't pick up firearms. Go to your city council meetings, damn it. Go to your school board meetings. That makes more of a difference in your life than what's going on in Washington. You know, a lot of these people who are going to defend our country against the tyrants have never been to a single city council meeting, I bet, or have ever been to a county commissioner meeting, or even a zoning board meeting, or even, you know what I mean. Never. And I guarantee you, what's going on, we live in Clay County, Missouri. What is going on in Clay County, in the courthouse there, is going to affect us much more deeply than what's going on in Jefferson City or Washington, D.C. Because there has been a lot of controversy. You know, the Jackson County, just to the south of us, the county that Kansas City and Independence are in, they've had an issue with tax assessments. They've all of a sudden decided, oh, well, we're so far behind on our tax assessments that we're just going to assess everybody higher now because we haven't been keeping up with it. And so now people have, their assessments on their property have gone from, for some people, up from maybe $1,200 a year to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a year. There's a lot of people who, like, all of a sudden can't live in their houses, being chased out of their houses because, oh, sorry, the county screwed up. Well, anyway, I've been talking to myself and apparently to Vice President Biden, soon to be President Biden, for long enough. So I'm going to wrap this up here, and I've done my little driving around, exploring, and talking crazy. I go home and be like, where have you been? I'm like, out like a crazy person, talking to myself, just the usual stuff. Woohoo! So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up here. So, as I like to say, hee hee, and see ya.